Charlotte Hebebrand. I'm the Director of Communications and Public Affairs at IFPRI, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's seminar. We will be looking at two very important and interrelated topics of great importance to Africa. The first one is looking at poverty trends on the continent. And the second topic is financing food systems transformation. And we know, of course, that the poor are the most hungry and malnourished. So those two topics really go very well together. We're really excited to hear from all of you, our audience, when we come to the Q&A session. And you can participate by submitting your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. And for those of you here in person, we do have a mic. So we're looking forward to a lively discussion. We're going to go through a number of short opening remarks, and we're kicking off with our Director General from IFPRI, Johan Swinnen. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for the introduction. Thank you, all of you here in the room and people online, for being with us today for what I think will be a very engaging discussion. And I also look very much forward to the presentations on extreme poverty and financing of food systems in Africa. As you all know, we're gathered here at the occasion of during the World Bank annual meetings, and leaders from Africa, from the US and from the rest of the world are gathering here today to discuss the most pressing development challenges and how to tackle them. I'm very pleased to see the panel and the setup today of the speakers and the presenters. We have colleagues from IFAD, from UNU-WIDER, from the World Bank, and obviously also from IFPRI to discuss these two recent reports. I'm sorry. First, we have an inaugural World Bank UNU-WIDER report on poverty and fragility. As the report will document and as the presentation will show, will highlight, Sub-Saharan Africa really is now the epicenter of poverty, fragility, nexus, and about 70% of people in fragile and conflict-affected areas are now living in the region, and half of the world's extreme poor are projected to reside in fragile Sub-Saharan Africa states by 2030. So these are very alarming trends. The second report is about an innovative approach to measuring finance and its different components in food systems as a whole, not just to agriculture. And this is the Africa report on external development financial flows to food systems. It's recently released by IFAD, by Academia 2063, and with contributions from IFPRI. And John Ulimwengu will present some of the key findings of the report. As you all know, the world is facing many challenges, with volatility rather than stability being the new norm in the world. And shocks are driven by a number of factors, including global disorder, conflict, previously the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, various climate change effects. The reports highlight the urgent need for financing and for policy pathways to reduce the poverty in the most vulnerable regions of Africa and to strengthen food systems across the continent. As many have emphasized for a long time, that Africa's agricultural potential is vast, but is unrealized. We see now from smallholder farmers to fast-growing agribusinesses, from innovations in seeds and digital agriculture, and we see already much of this taking place, but clearly not enough to address all the challenges. So tapping in that potential requires smart and strategic investments, as well as a collaborative effort between governments, the public sector, the private sector, and multilateral institutions. It also has implications for organizations such as IFPRI. We must invest in the collection of evidence and data-driven analysis to guide effective financing and financial strategies and policies. I think this is particularly important as government and development partners are confronting, on the one hand, the rising fragility, and on the other hand, the declining external flows. So we have to be more effective and more innovative in making this happen. And so for that, grounding decisions in rigorous research, stakeholders can better align resources with impact and chart more resilient and more equitable paths forward. So in conclusion, I think both of these reports and the event today is very timely. And so thank you again for participating today, for being here, and I look forward to the presentations and the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jo. A slight change in the program. We're going to have an additional speaker deliver a few opening remarks because she has to leave for important meetings. Enilde Sarmento is with us from Mozambique. She is a macroeconomist-advisor with the IMF and a member of Mozambique's delegation here to the annual meetings. And I welcome you to take the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to discuss a very important subject that is a huge challenge for the African countries, as we all know. So I would like to say that these two reports bring very important recommendations and findings about all the situation related with poverty, related with financial needs, to face this challenge that we know that the African countries are fighting every day to find a way to solve these, to be in a situation that really help protecting all the people that are on this situation. According with what we know that the countries are doing, are working to find a way to solve this, we understand that no single reform can boost resilience in isolation. What works best is a coordinated strategy that boosts especially fiscal capacity, that we know that it's a very challenge for the African countries, and deliver inclusive service. Countries that have managed well the fragility curve and poverty have done so by combining prudent macroeconomic policy, which we know that it's a kind of baseline needs, baseline scenario to deliberate investment and human capital and institutional reform. The key is the context-specific, locally owned strategies that are flexible enough to adapt as conditions change, because each country has specific conditions, specific context, and we need to work in a kind of combining policy to try to find a way to solve this challenge. When it comes to the financing that we need, that it's a challenge in these times, according with the reports and the other discussions, African economies will need to adopt a multi-strategy to sustain and attract the necessary investment, because we think that without new investment focus on the people, education, and health, it will be really a challenge to face these problems. So Africa needs to mobilize domestic resources in a more effective way, focus on regional integration and policy coordination, and work on innovative financial instruments. I think that this is a way to face all these challenges that these two reports brings to us to reflect and underscore this critical link between chronic and irregular fragility and persistent poverty in Africa. So I would like just to put this point on the table so that we can reflect and discuss together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Enilde. We're now going to hear from Luis Felipe López-Calva, who is the Global Director of the Poverty Global Department at the World Bank Group, and he's had a very long-standing research and interest career in tackling poverty and inequality. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning. I promise to be brief so we can go to the substance. Today, by the way, we are commemorating International End Poverty Day, October 17, so it's also a special day. Good morning. It's a pleasure to join you here at IFPRI, alongside with colleagues from IFAD, Academia 2063, and UNU-WIDER. And I also want to mention and thank Ana María Ibáñez, the Vice President of the Inter-American Development Bank, for joining us here today. I want to also begin by sincerely thanking our hosts and by recognizing the distinguished speakers, the panelists, and the participants who have joined us today for this discussion. Your presence reflects the strong commitment we all share to accelerating poverty reduction and transforming food systems in Africa. Let me also take this opportunity to express my appreciation, particularly and very deep appreciation for the excellent collaboration between the World Bank and UNU-WIDER. Thank you, Patricia, Justino, on the new Poverty and Fragility report that we are previewing today. This report represents genuine co-production of knowledge, bringing together rigorous data and conceptual innovation to understand how to make progress on poverty reduction in a world increasingly shaped by fragility. Because fragility is now at the very center of the global poverty challenge. By 2030, more than 60%, according to our projections, of the world's poorest people will live in fragile and conflict-affected states. One piece of information that is very relevant, just two countries, Nigeria and Democratic Republic of Congo, under the current trends, alone will account for 1/4 of the world's extreme poor. So poverty rates in this context are 5 times higher than in other developing economies, as we will see in the presentations with more detail. These numbers are not just statistics, they are also a stark reminder that poverty and fragility reduction must advance hand in hand. Finally, the findings of this report are also directly informing 2 important streams of work at the World Bank. First, to reinforce the new FCB strategy that will be presented very soon to our board. And second, they are shaping the new generation of poverty and equity assessments, guiding how we design policies and operations that respond to the specific realities of fragile contexts. So this collaboration today is reflected in the conversation that we will have, and is part of a broader effort to ensure that our analytical work and financing instruments jointly contribute to breaking the cycle of fragility and poverty and to building a more resilient, prosperous future for Africa. And it's very symbolic that we are doing it also during International End Poverty Day. Thank you to the participants again, and I will hand over, if I'm allowed, to Patricia for her remarks and introductions to the report. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm not taking your job.
No. Thank you very much for outlining some very important statistics there, and very worrisome statistics. We're actually going to hold off just a little bit on Patricia, and she will introduce the report in just a second. I'd like to invite Diane Menville to the floor first for also some opening remarks from her side. She serves as the Associate Vice President, and she's also the Chief Financial Officer at the IMF. At IFAD, another acronym. She serves as a member of the Executive Management Committee and is responsible for the design and implementation of financial policies and strategies. We're delighted to have you with us, Diane, and invite you to take the floor.
So thank you very much for the invitation. And on behalf of IFAD, I'm very proud to present our report, the Financing for Food Systems in Africa. Let's call it the 3FS, starting from now, in parallel of the presentation on extreme poverty driven by the World Bank. I would like to make 2 observations, and the first one is very generic, very obvious. It's to acknowledge, to recognize and highlight the importance of research. It might seem obvious, but we have financial constraints coming ahead, and it's important that we all keep in mind the importance of research to make sure that we have a data-driven and really strong approach in everything we implement. So I'm a CFO now. It's been a while since I haven't been doing research, but I am a statistician. And I like to quote another statistician, Edward Deming, who said that without that data, you're just another person with an opinion. We are not working with opinions. We are working with analytics. This is the objective of the report, bridging data gap and standardizing data. This is a first step. It's a long-term journey. We start with descriptive data, with having 3 countries in our pilot action. So we worked with Kenya, Niger, and Peru. We already have more requests, but we need to go further. We have to get information from all countries to have stronger databases, to make sure that we can move from descriptive to analysis of sensitivities, understand what is working, where and how. So this is needed. I would like to thank IFPRI and Academia 2063 for the progress we made and the collaboration. Again, research is key and should be preserved even when resources are constrained. That was my first a bit long remark. The second one is on the findings of the analysis themselves. So in our 3FS report, we make a stock take of financing food system transformation. And unfortunately, it has been highlighted before me, we see, let's say, a minimum mixed progress. The 3FS frameworks helps governments to track and analyze financing to food systems to improve our impact. It empowers the decision makers. So today we are pleased to present the Africa report, which offers an unprecedented analysis of external development financial flows to African countries between 2018 and 2023. The investments we make need to be targeting the rural population efficiently. The reports today contribute to our data-driven action because transforming food system requires transforming how we finance them and doing so accurately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. And now we're going to get into the meat of these 2 reports. The first one will be the Breaking the Fragility-Poverty Trap report by World Bank Group and UNU-WIDER. And Patricia Justino, who serves as the incoming director of UNU-WIDER, will be teeing up the report, and then we'll move over to Maria Eugenia Genoni, who's a senior economist also with the Poverty and Equity Global Practice at the World Bank. Both of these women have very extensive experience in looking at poverty and inequality, household risks. So it's my great pleasure now to turn over the floor to them. I'll let you go first, Patricia, and then turn over to Maria Eugenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. It is a great pleasure to finally see this report coming to fruition. It's been a work of almost 1.5 years. And actually it goes back, all these ideas go back a long time. They go back about 15 years ago when the World Bank produced the 2011 World Development Report, which was, in my opinion, one of the most influential reports produced by the World Bank. And it brought this idea to the forefront that you cannot understand economic development without understanding conflict and fragility. I know it's very obvious for many of us, but it was the first time an international organization brought this idea to the forefront, and it really did change development economics and development policy. And this happened because back in the day, it was a very starking statistics came to the fruition that we would, at the time, the Millennium Development Goals were tried to be achieved, and it was obvious by about 2008, 2010, that the only countries who would not achieve the Millennium Development Goals were either conflict-affected or extremely fragile countries. Therefore, with this idea that came to fruition. Now we find ourselves with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're in exactly the same situation we were 15 years ago, if not worse. The World Bank produced recently, with Felipe's team, the Poverty, Prosperity and the Planet report, highlighting that we will, first of all, that SDG 1, ending poverty, is not going to be achieved, and will take decades before it will be achieved. And the problem lies, again, once more, with fragile and conflict-affected countries. And the situation is getting worse. Currently, for instance, we have the largest numbers of conflict since the Cold War. There are currently 59 active conflicts in 34 countries in the world. This is the worst we have seen for several decades. Fragility is increasing in many parts of the world as well. But fragility, what happens is fragility is not everywhere. Not all fragile countries are fragile throughout the entire territory. And there are several countries who are not classified currently as fragile countries, which have severe pockets of fragility. So this is what we try to do in this report, highlight that we need to focus on these pockets of fragility and poverty. And this is really important in these days of restricted aid budgets, where more than ever, we need to be able to identify very precisely the problems in order to act effectively in terms of what policies work and what can be targeted. The report has two main contributions, but I'll let Maria Eugenia go into it in more detail. The first is focus on the subnational level. We think this is the first time we'll take seriously this idea of how can we identify the coincidence of poverty and fragility at a subnational level across as many countries as we could. And Maria Eugenia will also highlight data problems at this, trying to do this. And the second is we propose a new measure of fragility, which is a probabilistic measure, which places fragility on a continuum. And rather than what we see currently, which is other countries are either fragile or not fragile, but actually fragility is a continuum, is not a 0-1 state of the world. So we're proposing this new measure, hoping that others will take it forward. And I guess the objective of the report is to throw in these new ideas about how we think about these problems and hopefully generate new discussion about how we tackle fragility and poverty and make some progress, and hopefully we're not going to go back to continue where we were 15 years ago. So this is, just to finish, it's been a great pleasure collaborating with the World Bank, with Luis Felipe and Maria Eugenia over the last few years. The report also had contributions from the World Bank UNHCR Joint Data Center, the Fragility Group, and of course my wonderful team at UNU-WIDER, who I think are online, so it's not too early for them. And it's been a project in the making for so many years, and it's been wonderful that the World Bank allowed us to take this forward in this wonderful collaboration. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to IFPRI for hosting the launch of and the preview of the report. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Again, just to reiterate, it's been a pleasure to collaborate on this report with UNU-WIDER, and thank you so much for organizing this event. So as Patricia mentioned, the idea of this report is, in a way, built on several years of investment in data to provide an updated picture of what is the poverty situation in fragile settings. And so, in many analyses we've done in the past, we also struggle in trying to understand this picture and count these numbers because of the data, right? It's hard to collect this data in these settings, but there has been quite a good effort, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, in updating the knowledge base, and that's why it's timely to have this report now. And as Patricia also mentioned, the idea of this report is not only to highlight this striking concentration of poverty in fragile settings, but also push a bit our thinking in terms of how we go about this joint problem by looking at the subnational aspects and what are these hotspots of poverty and fragility, and also to think about fragility as this probabilistic measure that can give us signals of what's going to happen, years ahead. And so with this background, let me start with some of the key trends. As it was mentioned, today about more than a billion people are living in fragile and conflict-affected settings, as defined by the World Bank. And this number more than double than in 2005. In the figure here, you can see the number of people living in extreme poverty across time. And so in 2005, about 1 in 10 people living in extreme poverty were in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Today, we're talking about 6 out of 10 people. And it's not only the number of people, but also the poverty rates. So the poverty rates in fragile and conflict-affected settings are 6 times higher than in non-conflict-affected settings. We're talking about poverty rates of around 40% vis-a-vis 7%. As we also mentioned in this report, Sub-Saharan Africa is at the center, is at the core of this problem. 71% of people in FCS now live in Sub-Saharan Africa, up to 50% of a decade ago. And the region also accounts for 7 out of 10 of the world extreme poor. Out of those, 45% are living in fragile settings. So it's a significant overlap between extreme poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa and fragility. And our projections suggest that half of the world extreme poor are going to be living in these fragile Sub-Saharan states, particularly in Nigeria and the DRC. We tried to start unpacking a bit this measure of fragility by building on the current fragility measure and the historical classification. And here what we compare is, or we look at the distribution of the extreme poor depending on whether countries have been in the FCS list many years or where they've been coming out and in the FCS list. And as you can see, there has been a decrease in the number of extreme poor in chronically fragile countries, so countries that have been in that list for most of the period. But we also see that about 43% of the world's poor are living in these countries with intermittent fragility. So are countries that, in a way, at some point are fragile and some point are not classified as fragile. And this is what motivates a bit the analysis that we will present next. The patterns that we see in terms of increasing concentration in poverty reflect many things. First, more countries are becoming fragile. So, for example, Nigeria, Ethiopia, that are becoming part of the list. There's also significant population growth in fragile countries. And it's also the fact that economic growth has been significantly slower in these settings, and the inclusiveness of that growth process has also been slower. And so here what I'm presenting is this increased gap, growth divide between FCS and non-FCS. So it's a combination of elements. And so when we use these, the historical trends and we start projecting forward, what we see is that extreme poverty in FCS countries, based on the current forecasts, is going to actually increase to about 45% by 2050. So we will need significant increases in economic growth per capita to actually start seeing these declines in extreme poverty in these settings. So it definitely will take decades to tackle this problem. As Patricia mentioned, the key thing is as poverty concentrates, start to unpacking within countries. The stories vary quite a bit. So we're building on two important efforts. The first one is the Subnational Atlas of Poverty, which takes these global poverty numbers, but now produces this information at the subnational level, at, let's say, admin 1 level. So that gives us information on the poverty rates for 1,800 subnational units across 166 economies. And this really reflects a significant effort in collecting new data. So most of this information is actual data, not projections or models. And we also built a subnational measure of fragility, combining information on conflict, but also institutional markers, and as well as service delivery proxies to get a sense of the variation in levels of fragility, and we classify this between low, moderate, and high. But the database allows to play with these numbers as well. So building on these two sources of data, key takeaways are first, there are very clear subnational hotspots that are dominating the poverty story. So out of these 1,800 subnational regions, the poorest 200, right, are all but two are in Sub-Saharan Africa or in FCFE country. These 200 regions hold only 8% of the global population, but account for 40% of all people living in extreme poverty. And most of these regions, as you can see in the map, are clustered in the Western Sahel and across the belt from Ethiopia to Mozambique, and some regions in South Asia because they are very largely populated. So this, in a way, gives us a much more nuance on where the problem is. And what we did next is try to understand the relationship between these hotspots and where fragility is. And so here is a simplified way of looking at it, which is we want to see the places with the levels of fragility in areas with persistently high poverty at the subnational level, and then here in the figure on the right, we see the levels of fragility in areas that have shown reductions in poverty. And as you can see, there's a strong correlation between progress in poverty and low fragility. One of the measures that we can actually understand very well is conflict. Conflict is very good. We have very good data at the subnational level to actually look at these patterns across time. So with that data, we were trying to look at how that correlation has evolved across time. And what we are trying to convey in this figure is that there has been an increased correlation. It's not a static correlation, increased correlation across time between poverty and fragility. So I hope this in a way motivates the fact that it's very important to look at these elements within countries. But it's also, as I mentioned before, fragility, and what we're trying to convey is that it's quite dynamic, right? So it's very hard to understand or sort out this problem if we look at ones and zeros. And so what we try to build here is a fragility as a probability of a measure of state ineffectiveness. Where state ineffectiveness proxies failures in coercive capacity, which are proxied by conflict or loss of territorial control, and also failures in, let's say, administrative capacity by changes in institutional capacity and deterioration in public service delivery. So we take a lot of variables across time for a period of 2 decades that proxy these elements. We run a model to understand, okay, what determines the probability that a country becomes ineffective. And this measure, while it can be significantly improved because data is not perfect, it's still at a national level, gives us it starts giving us a lot of information about these hidden vulnerabilities and these hidden risks. And so, for instance, it shows places where there's still not failure at some point in time, but they have very high risks. And then we can decompose those risks between factors related to conflict or to institutional failure. The probability measure also helps us understand critical turning points. So there are some countries where the risks are high persistently, and there are countries where you see these risks going down and going up. And what we are trying to highlight with this is that this type of measures can really help guide prevention and target support. And finally, just to reinforce the point that when across time we see this dynamic correlation between state ineffectiveness and in the probability or increases in poverty. So when we find a failure, let's say in state ineffectiveness, poverty tends to increase in about 0.5 percentage point. So again, while this is not causal, what it shows is that it's this strong link between these elements, and if we can actually implement this in a more granular way at the subnational level, we can actually get a much better sense of where to act early. So this is a bit quickly some of the takeaways, and I'm out of time. But I think in terms of the implications of the report, this is a monitoring report, but what we are trying to highlight is three things. First, the importance of foundational investments to reduce this growth gap that I mentioned before, and particularly in closing these foundational gaps in terms of human capital and infrastructure. But thinking about how fragility operates in these settings and the fact that fragility is dynamic and multidimensional. So thinking about how to act early, how to protect losses of human capital when crises arise, and how to adapt and transform when countries start, in a way, recovering. And the third point is strengthening data for action. So I think we can actually inform this type of policies if we don't have this granular subnational data that can help us target much better the resources, and also think about these measures to guide anticipatory interventions, which can have significantly higher return than post-reaction to crisis. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patricia and Maria Eugenia for that overview. You teed up that we need significant economic growth in some of these countries to counteract some of these rather daunting outlooks. And you also talked about foundational investment. And I think that's a good pivot for us to now get into the second report that we're presenting here today. The IFAD Academia 2063 and IFPRI report on focusing on Africa, external development financial flows to food systems, was launched actually in Dakar at the African Food Systems Forum. And it's now my pleasure to introduce John Ulimwengu, who's my colleague at IFPRI, Senior Research Fellow. And he's engaged in strategic research on the transformation of food systems in Africa under the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, also known as CAADP. So many thanks, John, for presenting the report today, also on behalf of your two co-authors.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte, and thanks, everyone. Let me first provide a little bit of background on why Africa and why now. The 3FS, as you can imagine, is the short for financial flow to food system. It is a methodology, a framework developed by IFAD and the World Bank as a response to the UN food system call to innovate in food system financing. Now, why Africa and why now? If you recall, during the UN food system in 2021, Africa was one of the regions that adopted the so-called African Common Position on Food System, already recognizing that transforming food system needed more than just agriculture. And then early this year, head of state and the government met in Kampala and adopted the so-called CAADP Kampala Declaration, which focuses on food system transformation. And next week, there is a special meeting of special committee of ministers of agriculture and rural development so that will be discussing and hopefully adopting the guidelines into rolling out the Kampala Declaration starting next year. And one of the items in next week meeting will be food system financing. So that's the background. And why that matters? It matters because, as you all know, food system by nature is a complex web of connected activities, institutions, and people. So what it means that if one component of that web is not performing well, that will affect the rest of the system. What I'm saying is that if we have what I call the syndrome of fragmented food system financing, where you have money for input, but not enough for soil mapping, money for a road, but not enough for post-harvest technology or food safety, those type of dotted financing, it's not transformative. So that's the reason why this report he's bringing what's so-called the intelligence for financing, food system financing, food system transformation. In terms of methodology, as I said, this was developed by IFAD and the World Bank. The time frame is 2018, 2023. So the report doesn't really include what started happening since last year, but we do account for that in the conclusion. In terms of geographical scope, we include all the African countries, 55 African countries, and data coming from OECD, some complementary data from different other institutions. So that's pretty much the methodology and where the data are coming from. So in terms of trend, between 2018 and 2023, we can see that on average, there is this 19% increase in development flows as far as food system is concerned. And cumulatively, it's in $117 billion. And Africa has the lion's share of external development flows in between 38 to 43%. But it's good to highlight the fact that there was a decline in 2023 after some rebound because of COVID-19. So that's alone. So this is not even capturing what's happening since 2024, but already in 2023, we can observe a deep decline of funding. Well, so where the money goes, a lot of it is going to so-called ag development and value chain. So upstream and downstream activities, that's where you have access to inputs and all of that. And 23% in terms of infrastructure, including roads and irrigation. Environment and natural resources take 11%, nutrition and health 4%. A big chunk still going to social assistance, mainly food aid. Why this is important? Because when you look at other regions, it's all around 6%. So that's maybe problematic. Again, here, we are only capturing the first intent in terms of where the money is going, not really yet capturing the spillover impact, because we know that if we are investing in infrastructure, it's more likely to also support agricultural development and value chain and so forth. So this is just the intent, the primary intent of where the money is going. Who is getting the money? Geographically, 11 countries are getting 50%, around 50% of the flow, and those are the countries on the map. Well, one can make the case that when you put all together, these countries represent 56% of African population. So maybe the money is going where the people are. But then when you look at the per capita disparities, like a country like Burkina Faso is getting 54 per capita US dollar compared to Nigeria, 4. So it's very difficult to grasp what is the rationale behind. And this is very important because what it says, and I'll go to the where the money is coming from, is often we end up with what I call the financial orphan, food system orphans, not because of lack of money, but sometimes because of misalignment between the donors and the system needs. So that's very, very important. And who is funding Africa food system? Well, it's a diverse group, which I guess is a good thing, but they do not all do the same thing. Nearly 40% from the bilateral is going to social protection. When you go to multilateral, it's a big chunk go to agriculture development and value chain. The same for the philanthropy. So overall, the multilateral money, the money for food system in the continent is coming from the multilateral, followed by the bilateral, and of course, the philanthropy, which it's a growing trend, but it's not there yet. Again, they are not always financing the same thing. And this is very important because what it means that you cannot shift, that if one of this leave the pool, that we can replace that player with, no, it's a little bit more complicated. So who are the top donors? Again, it's a diverse group, still in that diversity, very small team, like for the multilateral, the EU institutions and the World Bank represent almost 65% of the money. Among the bilaterals, what I call the big seven, US, Germany, France, UK, Japan, and Canada, represent nearly 80% of the money. And that gives you a little bit of what it means if one of those decide to pull out of the game. And of course, among the philanthropy, Gates, MasterCard, Bezos, Fund represent 80% of the money. So it's really a small group of institutions that are providing all the money. So in terms of financial instrument and emerging trend, ODA is still, well, the most channel to external money, 83% almost. But we see some the new other official flows in terms of concessional loans, guarantees, export guarantees, for example, subsidies and grants, around 14%, and of course the philanthropy. So the new trend is this looks more like a blended finance and guarantees. Between 2018 and 2023, we have the increase in 15% from 15% to 36%, which I think it seems like where the way to go. So what to make out of all of this? It's true that Africa is still the post charge of external development money, but given what happened, what is happening, the shift in financing, development financing landscape, it is very important for Africa to take the lead in how they decide to finance food system. And this must start with the move from commitment to action under the Kampala Declaration. So if you read the Kampala Declaration, the CADEP Kampala Declaration, there are 6 strategic objectives. And the second objective is on financing food system transformation, which have 2 overall targets. 10% budget allocation to agri-food system. It used to be to agriculture. Now they are extending it to agri-food system. And then mobilize between 2026 to 2035, $100 billion for agri-food system transformation in the form of public-private partnership. And so one thing that before I leave, in the report, we focus on external flows. So we are not capturing government expenditure here, no private money. That was coming into the follow-up iteration of the report. But as the colleague from IFAD said, there are country-specific reports where we dive into the government money and private sector. So where to find the report? This is the link. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Diane. I think this report is so timely given the external environment we find ourselves in. It's quite striking, I think, to see those figures And then, as John said, to think about even just one of those players dropping out of the system, what the implications of that are. So we're now going to discuss these two really rich reports, and I would like to introduce our panel for the discussion and ask them to come up as I introduce them. We're delighted to have a delegation with us from Somalia. Kamal Gutale serves as the Permanent Secretary for the Office of the Prime Minister of the Federal Government of Somalia. Within the Office of the Prime Minister, he ensures the effective implementation of national policies and programs. Kamal, we welcome you. If you'd like to take the floor, have a seat up here. And welcome. And we also have with us from Somalia, if he's here, Abdi Hakim Ainte. I think I saw him. Please join us as well. Abdi Hakim serves as the head of the Food Security and Climate Change, also in the Office of the Prime Minister. So we welcome you as well. Also joining our panel is Diane Menville. We have already introduced you, so we're glad to have you back. Swinnen, whom we know as well. And then it's my pleasure to introduce Ana Maria Ibanez. She is the Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge at the IDB. Welcome. For those of you in the audience, please keep your questions coming, because once we hear from our panel, we'll open it up to questions. So I'm going to start with our Somali delegation. Sorry, I just got my questions a little bit out of order. So we have heard, Kamal, that the number of extreme poor and fragile and conflict-affected areas has doubled since 2005. And 42% of these extremely poor people are living in countries with intermittent fragility, and some 20% of them in chronically fragile countries. Given Somalia's experience, could you perhaps highlight some lessons that the country has learned, as well as remaining research and policy gaps that are relevant to the situation in fragile and conflict-affected areas?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. Good morning to you all. I think the report was very comprehensive, both reports, and let me start first with the first report. I would like here to give you the context of Somalia before I start with the lessons learned lessons learned from our experience. But first, let me start with Somalia's post-COVID time. I think all of us, we were affected by COVID, and as the report rightly said, global poverty has doubled since 2019. But it was not, in the case of Somalia, it was even worse, because we had experienced a severe drought in 2022-2023 that actually drove our food insecure population to around 7 million people. It also drove our displacement, or the internal displaced people, to around 4 million people. So that was actually half of our population were affected in that sense. And from there, actually, that was the worst time between 2022-2023. It was a year that actually we thought that we will recover from COVID, but just it actually doubled down on that situation. On the last household survey, around 54% of Somalia was under the poverty rate. Somalia has actually improved on the governance situation. It has improved on debt relief, and it became a post-HIBIC status country. But I mean, those who remain in the poverty under $2 are around as you said, around 54%. So that actually shows us how the situation is actually very, very impacted as a fragile and conflict countries. And then from 2023 and 2024, we went into an open war against the terrorists, which comes, and again, the conflict part that actually we were in. So, the government was tackling the terrorists in an area of around 500 kilometers, which the population was not less than around 2 million were affected in those places. So, all in all, that was actually the situation from COVID, from severe drought, and then conflict affected through one. And then came the USAID funding cuts, which the IMF actually was projecting 2024-2025 as a recovery year, and that year actually came. Our growth projection was 4.1%. Now it has been revised into 3.3%. So those main effects actually has impacted our situation. The growth rate in the region, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania and Uganda, when you see, is around 7%. Under the National Transformation Plan, we actually tried our best to articulate transformation, how we can get out from this situation. First and foremost, we have started with institutional building. When the drought came, we had tried to revive the Somali Disaster Management Agency. We have established a new institution that we call the Center for Rural Development and Durable Solutions Center, that actually we've tried to make institutional approach to tackle those challenges, and actually it worked for us. Now, actually, we are trying our best to do some local ownership, that we are actually trying to take development to subnational level, to districts and local municipalities. And we have prepared many developmental indexes that tie to their performance. So issues like health, education, water, and infrastructure improvement now are actually tied to their performance index, to their annual performance index. So there is many lessons actually we are trying to adapt in that sense from those situations that actually we have learned a lot on also how to tackle overseas development assistance that actually went down and affected the overall growth of through around 1%. It affected us around $1 billion in aid, now has been slashed. And that actually came to us that just to look for alternative financing options and mobilize funding through other means. So that's actually where we are, and the lessons we are learning. There is also what we want to improve as well is the data that actually we are collecting. SMBS is trying their best to improve their data mechanism, but also there's a big room to improve in that sense. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kamal. I think this confluence of epidemic conflict in your own country and climate events, of course, paint a quite daunting picture. Maybe I can turn to your colleague, Abdi Hakim, because we understand that the government of Somalia is actually trying very much right now to tackle the topic of financing your food systems transformation in particular. So maybe you could just give us a very brief overview of the plans that you're setting forth, and I imagine you're spending quite some time this week talking about those plans here also in Washington, about putting together a private-public partnership to support food systems transformation in your country.
First of all, thank you so much, and congratulations for the report. It's actually very interesting. I was just taking screenshots of some of the reports, so it would be good if you could share with us. It has a really very nitty-gritty detail of it. What I find out before I just answer the question is the report really shows both an interesting but at the same time quite a depressing data. On one front, that the ODA is plummeting, but on the other hand, that the increase of poverty and food insecurity in the continent is really increasing. I mean, 750 million people are faced with, or do they go to the bed every night feeling hungry? That's criminal. That's morally criminal. And also contrast that with the funding issue. It's really a dichotomy that we absolutely need to challenge with. And I say that because of in Somalia, and as you said, that we have a unique set of challenge that is distinctly different from other fragility countries because of the trap that we have. It's not only a trap that inventing form primarily on the institutional fragility, but also on the natural fragility of the climate shocks that are recurring in the current in every cycle, and you compound that with the conflict and then pandemics and then other fragilities that the PS was talking about. When you put all those into a context, what you end up having is a country that has deeply and systemically trapped into a protracted humanitarian trap. And how you get that out is the big question that we definitely need to look. The other point is, with regard to the fragility report, is most of these reports, they are written or they have been framed in the thinking of having a fragility in mind as well, right? Even the definition of it, I was in Abidjan last week when the bank was announcing or basically launching the report, and there was quite a number of existential questions, such as the definition, by the very definition of the fragility. Is it only a characteristic definition, or is it a real definition with regard to fragility? So characteristics, yes, we could probably be fitting into the characteristic side, but on the definition, there needs to be a rethinking on that because of reports and data are carried or done in the thinking of a fragility in the bank. So the very data that you have is informed. And the reason why I say that the dynamic and the tenor of fragility has shifted. What used to be a fragility a couple months ago is no longer. Now we are exposed to a global financial decline. How are we squaring or factoring this fragility into the global dynamic? So it's a question around how we really frame the fragility in what's already a fragile and a very combustible context. Having said that, what we are doing with the partnership, that's the question. I think the PS has really articulated that very well. I think Somalia is faced with a two existential dilemma. On one hand, a short-term crisis that are keep sucking in and pulling you in, which are humanitarian emergencies. On the other hand, you've got a massive development plan. So how do you balance this delicate balance where you need to address while trying to fix and build the institutions, especially the resilient institution, at the same time, how do you also save lives next day so that they don't undermine your longer term thinking? And this is exactly the question of the real fragility test should be, how do you balance in an emergency situation together with the development thinking? So again, is this background is why the government of Somalia is having now one of the most boldest initiative called the Somali National Transformational Plan. 5 years a blueprint that lays out the foundation for a country such as Somalia to really transition out of protracted context and then move towards to a developmental context. And in this case, we've got quite a number of thematic or kind of a big portfolio priorities, one of which is the what we are calling a resilience development. Underneath, you have a food systems where we are now working on the national food system pathways, integrated both the national and subnational level, but also we're looking into the agriculture, not only through the lenses of small farmer holders agri, but also we're looking through the lenses of malnutrition, especially children who are, live in the bracket of extreme malnutrition. It's not a small number. We're talking about a couple million, girls and boys who lived through this malnutrition. So how do you help them and then help them to leapfrog into the human capital. And this is exactly why we're calling it Somali Agri-Food Investment Partnership. We launched it in Dakar, and it's a big initiative that we're looking and trying to help and invest in the nutrition with the aim of investing in the human capital side of the context. And that's exactly what we mean development. Development in really addressing the challenges that, as a state of Somalia, is sucking our resources, taking our energy, and always discouraging us to focus the broader picture. And this is exactly what we mean, having a bold but realistic, pragmatic initiative that can really help us. And so we have the Pathway Food Systems, integrated national, and we have a council, a high-level council that was conceived by the Prime Minister, they have the capacity to convene. We convene in every month, and then we discuss issues of a national importance. And we're so laser-focused now on really how can we elevate the cyclical and the chronic food insecurity that has crippled our credibility for the last 30 plus years.
Thank you so much, Abdi Hakim. I noticed that you also talk about a 2 billion, I think, import gap, right? That perhaps could be filled with more agricultural and food systems transformation in the country. Let's move to Diane now. Diane, as you know, the 3FS report sort of talks about this complementarity between bilateral and multilateral external funding that is going to Africa. And the bilateral funding tends to focus more on meeting urgent needs. Some 40% of bilateral financing is going to social protection, and out of that, 98% to emergency food aid. And yet multilateral flows, including those from your organization, IFAD, tend to focus more on structural transformation. So given where we are today in the decline of perhaps both types of external funding, how do you see sort of the mix of the different types of funding playing out? And how is IFAD thinking about this, this mix? And are you adjusting anything with regard to your own financing?
Thank you very much for the question. And before I even answer, I would like to thank Somalia for what they just said. I think I mentioned research is important, but the reality is what you are facing. We are not talking about numbers, we are talking about people, we are talking about facing uncertainties that we cannot get in our models. So it's very important that we remain solution-oriented. You're right. The atmosphere is not positive, but what is positive is that we are all together trying to find solutions. So that's, thank you for the intervention. Back to your question, I think that we all know the ecosystem of key actors in the food systems financing landscape is under pressure, whether for political decisions, budget strength, budget tightening, whatever the reasons, what we observe is ODA is freezing and the perspectives are not positive. So we see that in the report. On the one hand, it will affect the bilateral funding, which is focusing on humanitarian response capacity. We saw decline. We saw that the food aid fell by 21% in 2023. So that's on the one end. On the other end, as you mentioned, the IFIs, which have worked on the long-term structural investments, are also struggling. We already observed a decrease. The share of food system financing in the development finance moved from 15% in 2018 to 13% in 2023, due to growing competition among sectors for development. So we are used of that complementarity of factors. It's one important finding or confirmation in the report. Bilateral finance urgent needs, 40% of their financing being dedicated to social assistance, and multilateral finance long-term transformation, 90% of their financing being dedicated to structural long-term projects and private sector. So what happens to this implicit division when funding decrease? How can we make sure that some financing remains also for these structural changes, that it's not all absorbed by emergency and short-term reaction? So I think that, and again, back to your intervention, more than ever, LMICs must lead their strategies by assembling the right mix of financial instruments, national budgets, capital market resources, grants, concessional loans. And this is where the 3FS framework helps. It enables decisions and decision makers to make the right choices, having a clear visibility on the flows. Domestic, because it was mentioned in the country-specific report, we also analyzed the domestic flows. So on domestic, external and private source, it's critical. How IFAD is reacting, I think that IFAD is not making big changes in the strategy, because IFAD has always been there for focusing, dedicating 100% of their funding towards rural transformation and low and middle income economies in food system transformation. Between 2018 and 2023, this is 5 billion of support that has been disbursed from IFAD. Now talking about the regions, we all, it was clearly stated there is a need, a specific need in Sub-Saharan Africa, and it's 51% of IFAD's financing. So I think that IFAD will continue keeping the same focus. And looking ahead, actually, this is something that was also emphasized at the beginning of this week. We launched together with the World Bank the AgriConnect initiative, and that's a commitment from IFAD to reach at least 60 million small-scale farmers to increase their income, to access markets. So again, it builds on our proven impact, so no major change is to be expected on IFAD's side.
Excellent. Let's turn a little bit, I know this is a meeting about Africa, but we're going to now pivot a little bit to Latin America. And Ana Maria Ibanez, I introduced you earlier. You are the Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge at the IDB, and you have done very important research yourself on migration, rural development, and the consequences of conflict. The Poverty and Fragility Report defines fragility as a spectrum of risk, the probability that states lose core functions. Could you talk a little bit about your work in Latin America, because it also shows that inequality and weak institutions can lock in disadvantage. Do you see some parallels between these fragility traps and the region's intergenerational inequality?
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. The report, which by the way is very interesting, it comes at a very timely moment for us at the Inter-American Development Bank. We are currently discussing how we are going to operationalize our framework, our fragility, conflict, and criminal violence framework for Latin America and the Caribbean. However, unrelated to your question, Latin America and the Caribbean has some dimensions that are different from Africa. And some dimensions of the report, I do believe, are very important for what we want to do at the Inter-American Development Bank. Let me give you a little bit of context of the region. If you look at the reductions on poverty rates in Latin America, we had a big reduction from about 60% to 30% in poverty rates between the end of the 90s and 2014. However, in 2014, this reduction and this progress stalled, and poverty rates have been hovering around 30% in the region. In addition, something that is very important in the region, we have many countries, or all countries in the region, have a high exposure to different shocks, either macroeconomic shocks. We have a lot of volatility in GDP growth, but also natural disasters and crime. And this implies that we have 31% of the people that are transitioning in and out of poverty constantly. This is the vulnerable population, which is people that we need to take care of. And when we look at the natural disasters, which is something that is currently very important in the region, about 50% of the poor population live in disaster-prone areas. So that's an issue that is important for us. And you can imagine that those areas that have higher likelihood of being exposed to a natural disaster and not resilient to that natural disaster are areas with weak capacity, with state capacity, and also they lack public services from the state. However, the bulk of the poor population in Latin America lives in an urban area. To your question, inequality is very large, and what we see is that around 44 to 63% of total income inequality comes from inherited factors. And part of those inherited factors are the geography, the area where people lives on. And so, again, this is very related with weak institutions and low service provision. However, and unlike other regions, when we look at Latin America, really, these disadvantaged and fragile sub-regions in Latin America and the Caribbean are not facing conflict. No? We have many other challenges. Nonetheless, violence in Latin America is extremely high. We have 8% of the population, but we have around 30% of the homicides in the world. So we have a huge problem, a violence problem in Latin America, and about 50% of those homicide rates are due to criminal organized crime. Hence, when we talk about the fragility index, one thing that we really need to define is how to measure criminal violence. That's why our fragility framework includes criminal violence and organized crime as something that is important. And that's what we are trying to do with the fragility, conflict, and criminal violence report. But we have several challenges to measure criminal violence. When we can look at it with homicides, because we have a lot of data for homicides at the subnational level, but when you overlap the homicides with other types of criminal violence, and this is something that Patricia knows very well, the overlap is not high. And so in the places where organized crime are imposing criminal governments, homicides not necessarily are high, but other crimes are very high. So we're tackling this challenge of how to measure criminal governance. And I would say that the report has two things that for us are very important. The first one is the spectrum, the probability of fragility, of falling into fragility. And why do I believe it is important? Because we don't have many fragile countries in Latin America, the country as a whole, but we do have a lot of geographic pockets of fragility. And sometimes those pockets of fragility, when you were showing the map, Maria Eugenia, many times those pockets cross borders. No? And so when we have the spectrum and the probability, it would be very easier to anticipate when a sub-region is going to fall into fragility. And I do believe that's very important, and for us as multilateral organizations to undertake anticipatory measures, hopefully, to reduce the probability of falling into fragility. And the second and very important one is the subnational level. Because when we look at the countries, we don't have fragile countries, but we do have subnational regions that are very fragile, very, very fragile, and that are facing difficult problems. So looking at the subnational data is very important for us, and thank you for the contribution.
Great, thank you for highlighting that particularity about Latin America and Caribbean. Very interesting intervention. In addition to heading IFPRI, you also served as the chair or co-chair of the finance lever back at the UN Food Systems Summit. And I also want to point to another expert in the room, Eugenia Diaz-Bonilla, who worked closely with Yo as well on these questions about how do you actually calculate the external flows and internal flows that are coming to food systems. So a question for you, Yo. John referred to the 10%, the new ambition of the new CAADP framework, 10% of public resources should be spent on food systems. Is that realistic? I think last time around the 10% for agriculture was not met, but maybe now there's greater impetus to meet a target like that. But how do you actually see countries being able to do that? And are there opportunities for them to take some of their existing funding and place it more firmly into food systems transformation?
Thanks very much, Charlotte, for the question. And first, a big congratulations to the presenters and for, of course, the report and the people who contributed to the report. I think what's interesting on the report is not just the new data, but also both of them make methodological innovations. And so I think that's really great. On the question itself, okay, if you look back, right, then or see what's going on now. The one thing which is promising, I think, is the commitment which is reflected in the CAADP declaration of the countries themselves, the ministers who signed off on it, of basically reinforced investments, okay, and their commitment to do that. So I think that's a promising sign. However, if you look back in how they dealt with the previous declaration or objectives, I mean, clearly there's been underinvestment in almost all the countries, in 80% of the African countries, I think, okay? So I hope that the reinforced commitments, okay, will lead indeed to also effective increased investments there. Now, the signs, as you say, it's a very challenging environment. The latest numbers I got was that this year we have a 17% decline in ODA. The number for the G7 is even more worse. They expect like almost a 1/3 decline in between 24 and the projection for 26 in ODA. And as John showed from the numbers, if I got it right, 83% of the finance that he had is from ODA. So these are really, really challenging developments, I think. I think given that's there, that is a situation, there's two big ways forward, if you want. One is to find new ways of finance, innovative ways of finance. And the other one is basically doing better with what you have. And so doing better with what you have brings in what we refer to as the repurposing agenda, basically looking at the money that is already spent. Now, we know globally that's around $800 billion. Now, most of that is in OECD countries and in China. Okay, that's the vast majority. But also, if you look at the percentage of public spending in developing countries, okay, if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, there's a lot of public investment or public expenditure, let's put it that way, that can be used better, more effective for the targets that we have here. Last week, we had a really interesting seminar here at IFPRI where we brought in examples from several emerging and developing countries where practitioners and policymakers actually gave examples of how they had made changes in their policies with really big effects on food security and poverty reduction. So there is a lot of potential there as well. I think we work with several countries in Africa on basically bringing this realignment of policies, repurposing into the national action plan in a number of different ways. In terms of the innovations, I think there maybe I mean, we've heard, John referred to it in the report as well, and I was very intrigued to see that some of the things like blended finance, some of the other things are increasing. It would be interesting to see the details and how much are they increasing and how much is the potential, but certainly it's a big thing, a big area. I think bringing in the private sector, okay, is unavoidable, okay, making this a much stronger partner in finance. Financial flows within the value chains are the most important source of funding of food systems in general, and actually leveraging the structure of the value chain, the institutions which are there for bringing in more private capital, or even basically bringing in global investors, I think should be done. We have written on that. I think there is a lot of room because, for example, climate finance only less than 1% goes to smallholder agriculture, less than 4% goes to food systems. I mean, that has to increase, okay? And for that, I think the link with the private sector is really important. But of course, the fragility issue is problematic there, because in a more fragile environment, it is, of course, much more difficult to bring in this private sector investment as well. So it's a bit of a virtuous circle or a vicious circle, depending on which side you're going to. And maybe the last point is on insurance, okay, it's really important. I mean, particularly also in fragile environments, I think, or in basically volatile environments. But at the same time, it's much harder to have to set up insurance systems in these environments. So again, there's a bit of a virtuous and vicious aspect on that.
Maybe one follow-up question, Yo. Both reports really stress the importance of reducing poverty while strengthening resilience and stability. And I think the conflict, as well as the organized crime situation, makes me think about also what is going to be motivating, perhaps in the future, external funders to support countries, right? Because the violence, the conflicts could in fact lead to repercussions for the traditional donor countries. Let's call them that. So given that mix of topics, could you speak a little bit, maybe just for all of us to hear, how IFPRI is looking at how can we best move countries from fragility to stability, and tie it in perhaps with this larger question of why is that of interest to the world at a moment when we're actually cutting back on external development funding?
Yeah, so we've at the CGIAR, we launched in 2022 a big research program on fragility, conflict, and migration. Actually, Katrina, who's in the audience here, is the leader of that program. And so at IFPRI, we've been basically refocused, I would say, on this. Was pockets that was going on, but it's now a big program for us. Actually, in a way, the data that we saw today is really confirming our idea of why this is important. I think the way the UNU-WIDER and the World Bank project, how you frame it, and bring it explicitly together is really the focus of our work as well. So we've basically, and this brings also the points which are very clearly emphasized by our colleagues from Somalia in terms of how you do at the same time crisis management and building and investing in the longer future. So that's really at the heart of what we try to do as well. So we have parts of our research is focused on anticipatory action, kind of predicting crises that may emerge, where they may emerge, in what form they may emerge, monitoring when they're there, and therefore also response advice or engagement with other partners who do the response. And at the same time, a third component is really studying or basically analyzing what the best ways is for investments in resilience and in a medium and long-term recovery. That's the three big components. We are active on the ground in, I think, 6 or 7 countries, which are identified as fragile and conflict areas. We are working in several other countries, including in Somalia, with local partners there. We don't have a country team on the ground, but we work with local partners. And so we try to use the most innovative technologies that exist, AI, new indicators that we developed, satellite-driven data, but at the same time also sometimes very let's say, old-fashioned technologies like telephones and things like that, because, well, that's the thing which works more efficiency, and that's also how you engage with local stakeholders there. I have actually a whole list of, we have a whole list of specific things that we do, but I don't think we need to go into this in this panel, but I'll be happy to respond to some questions, and maybe some of the IFPRI experts in the room can also come in if there's questions on that.
Excellent, great. Let me invite the authors of the report up now to join us on the panel, and Patricia, please join us as well as we move into the Q&A session. If any of you in the room have a question, please let me know and I will call on you. We've had a number of questions coming in online, and welcome you to keep asking those questions. So there's a question, I think I'm going to first direct it to you, John, because you are a researcher. So we have a question here from Mahmoud Alawai, who is asking, I think, a really important question. How can African researchers, the majority of which are, of course, on the spot in the countries that we're talking about, How can they better assess poverty impact, and how can they better be coordinated to address some of these topics? Given the highly transitional nature of poverty in these countries, could you speak about how to support some of those African researchers in doing that very important on-the-ground work?
Well, well, there are many ways to do that. The first is it has to be demand-driven. We need to listen to the government. We need to listen to the policymakers. What is the demand for that type of knowledge, that type of evidence? That's one. Second, and it's some of what IFPRI does. We jointly develop some of our research, our work with local teams. That is a part of the capacity building of every type of research that we do on the ground. And when it comes to poverty, well, it is by nature, it is dynamic. So there is a need for sustainability in what type of research we do, which means that we need to continue to collect data and of course also use all kind of new methods, new tools available for that regard. So that's as a researcher, that's what we do. But I know what the challenge is for people who are sitting in countries. Challenge in terms of data collection, in terms of some of the tools, even just as support, financial support to the knowledge or evidence, the demand for evidence. So what is the willingness to pay for those evidence? And when you have some of the big players, I won't name them, getting out, it becomes very difficult for some countries to sustain the need for knowledge, the need for evidence, and that's unfortunately leaving some of our colleagues in countries without support. So that will be what I'll say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Patricia, do you want to add anything to that question, maybe a reflection on how to support African researchers? Because we've heard over and over again how important the data is. So how can we support the people perhaps best placed to access that data?
Yeah, no, that's a very important question. I mean, generating capacity, local capacity to analyze the data is really crucial, both in academia but also within governments. And every investment that goes into that it's rewarded by just governments having and local stakeholders have a better handle on what is happening in their own country. That's, for instance, the model that UN-WIDER takes. UN-WIDER has country programs. It operates in several countries in Africa, working alongside the government in order to build data systems and data analysis capacity. And, I always say that my proudest moment is when we see the sort of young talent coming through the system and taking on positions at central banks, at ministers of finance, and so forth. And it seems like that we kind of training one person at a time, but those people matter because that's where change comes from. And attention to evidence-based policies, the importance of data, the idea that, like the IFAD lady mentioned before, that it's not about opinion, it's about facts. That's how change happens, is by investing in those people in the research capacity and analytical capacity.
Great, thank you. Abdi Hakim, would you like to come to the mic perhaps to ask your question?
Can you hear me? So thank you so much again. As I said, the report is very valuable, but I have quite an unpopular question, so I'll put across all of you.
All questions allowed.
Okay. It is about the finance. So the CADAP is 10% commitment from every African state. That is still far from, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's not even remotely close to what most of African continent promised. And based on your presentation, the ODI, most of the ODI, while it is declining, but it's coming mostly from the global north, right? And then one has to wonder if we are not owning and investing in our own sustainability and our own investment, then who's doing it? Which brings me my question. Amidst of this decline, could there be an alternative way of thinking where we can say, okay, ODI, it's on a nosedive, right? We're not honoring the 10%, at least not honoring, but we're not meeting, let me put that word, we're not meeting the 10% commitment. So amidst of this, where can we turn to in an alternative of financing the food transformation in the continent? I think that is something that really keeps me at night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe John, you want to come in on that. I mean, I think the report, clearly, I think both reports actually say that a domestic resource mobilization is crucial now for addressing. It has implications of where you spend your money and also how you raise that money, right? So maybe, John, do you want to say something briefly about that?
Yes. Well, this is my take on that. When it comes to African countries, some are nursing the idea that somehow we will go back to the normal. No, the message is this is the normal now, right? You have to own the financing, food system financing. But as you said, often it's not always in terms of more money, but how do we use efficiently what we have? And, it will come after this report, the next iteration. So we are developing a tool on mapping food system to pinpoint the areas of the system that is struggling. As they said, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But how do you know where it is broken? Before going and raising additional money, let's first identify the areas of the system that is in need of money now, and then we can repurpose. We can take wherever we are. I mean, in countries that I want to cite, 80%, that is government money, is going to agriculture. Now, if you look at food system, that's way beyond agriculture. So that alone is a problem, because it means that there are areas in the food system that are receiving too much, while others are receiving too little. If we can start by fixing that, that alone will get us somewhere. And then, innovative financing, blended financing, that's all the developing the local, mobilizing the local savings that will come after. But let's first make sure we identify the areas, and then how do we efficiently allocate what we have now?
Great, thank you. Let's take a few questions. Eugenio, and then the gentleman in the back, and Katrina, and you, sir. We'll take 4 questions.
Thank you, Charlotte. Eugenio Díaz Bonilla, I'm with IFPRI and IICA. Going to your point, I represented Haiti at the as executive director at the IDB, so that the dilemma that you mentioned, how to solve the crisis, but at the same time, the immediate crisis was putting the foundation for the long-term development. That basically requires, in some sense, the donors sometimes intervene in a way that doesn't help, because you need to work with the governments, not through parallel institutions, and at the same time, sometimes the issue of peace is central. In the case of Haiti, you need to solve first the peace issue, while at the same time not working through parallel institutions to do the things quickly. So instead of building institutions to solve the problem, you solve the problem while building institutions. So that's what I saw in Haiti. And of course, the history of conflict, etc., comes from Adam Smith, when he said the only thing you need is peace, low taxes, and so on. Then you have a Valdarn and you have the UN. 1943. So we have a lot of experience on this issue. IFPRI did work on conflict and food insecurity late 90s. So, the IDB did a lot of work on crime, etc., in the late 90s. So there is a body of evidence, and the main thing is countries cannot do that alone, because as Ana Maria mentioned, they sometimes are over borders. So that's my general comment on the fragility. On the second, and by the way, congratulations on the papers. I should have said that at the beginning. The 3FS, we work. I just wanted a little bit of advertisement for IFPRI. We started that work at IFPRI in 2017 on Honduras, and that was then expanded through the work of the 3FS, and we've been advising. The main point now, in my view, is to move, and we were talking about that, from government in the ODA and the International Development Funds and the public budget to banking and capital markets. That's the next step. And it needs a completely different framework, because the framework that we developed was for the government. It was based on the 5 main ministries, agriculture, infrastructure, social protection, health, and environment. Then if you are talking about banking system and capital markets, that's a completely different framework. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Important comments. We have a representative here of the United States of Africa. I like your T-shirt, sir.
Thank you very much. Normally, I don't have questions for panelists. I usually will tell them certain things that will help them see what they are working in a better light. Because most times what panelists do is that thing about the guy who was looking for his key under the light, and they say, what? He said, why are you looking for what are you looking for? I said, my key. I said, why are you looking here? I said, well, there is light. So you guys should start looking where it's not light, where dark. In the 60s and early 70s, our position on African countries were those who are independent and the ones who will be independent for sure, that they are not a viable political entity. Later on, you all come up now with few years ago about fragility. We're ahead of you. We say the only way they will become modern countries, they have to have political federation, like Nkrumah was saying. 2027, September 21, the 54 head of government, those who are alive, will declare Songhai Federation, because we will have the referendum on the constitution then. Just watch. Oh, by the way, this is what Gaddafi was working on, and that's why he was killed. You all see me all the time. He was reporting to me. It's my project. I'm now getting ready to unite the continent.
Would you like to introduce yourself as well, sir? Let us know who you are.
I'm Yaya Fanisi with the United States of Africa 2017 Projects Task Force. I am head of special operations, so I know what's going to be happening.
Okay, let's see, where were we? Katrina. As Yo mentioned, Katrina heads a lot of the fragility work here at IFPRI and within the CGIAR.
Yeah, thank you so much. Katrina Kosick, Senior Research Fellow here at IFPRI and currently leading the area of work on fragile and conflict-affected food systems for CGIAR. This is fascinating, by the way, so thank you to all the authors. In the spirit of looking for our keys away from the light, I've got 2 big questions. The first is, we are hearing about increasing need to recognize that fragility and areas of conflict are often exist in countries and settings in which there is not a fragile and conflict-affected country overall, but we need to focus on that increasingly. At the same time, we see these swelling populations in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and therefore more urgent needs in those countries. How are we to balance this sort of dual need to focus on an additional set of non-fragile countries, while the problems within fragile countries and conflict-affected countries are also swelling? We heard, in Nigeria and DRC alone will contain 30% of the world's extreme poor by 2030. So that's the first issue. The second one is, we often want to proceed in a world in which we can have sort of best bets, good guidance, and we want to take this beyond one context in order to maximize the value of that research. How do we operate in fragile and conflict-affected settings where context is often everything and really means that our work is not traveling to other settings? I've seen much donor interest in sort of looking at trying to understand what works and not wanting to hear that context is everything. But I've heard our colleagues from Somalia here today remark on this point. And so I'm wondering how how we can try to maximize the value of our work and the ways that it can travel while taking into account that we need to have our fingers on the pulse of what's happening. We need to be working with researchers in country that know these contextual realities and can help us navigate them. Thanks so much.
Introduce yourself. Thanks.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Malik Aidara. I'm a former USAID Foreign Service Officer. Most recently, I serve at USAID Nigeria as the Director of Economic Growth and Agricultural Portfolio. This was actually a very important and interesting panel. This question is actually most likely to IFAD, John. As you mentioned, the 3FS report is actually indicated a declining external funding for transforming food systems. And as you will imagine, this situation will actually worsen with the departure of USAID funding, right? And Diane indicated in her remarks that IFAD is not really expected to actually change it's the focus of its strategy, particularly given that the focus that IFAD has been actually implementing from 2013 to 2018 remains still valid, right? But I'm just wondering, in this context of declining funding, how is IFAD actually adapting its financial instruments, such as blended finance or heavy climate bonds, to crowd in more funding, right, to help countries, to help African countries tackle in a more effective manner their effort to transforming the food systems. And I have a second question to Mr. Gutale from Ilautu. I do commend the government of Somalia for the bold program that is actually launching to tackle poverty reduction and food insecurity. And but I think you also indicated in your remark that the GDP of Somalia is actually taking a hit from over 4% to around 3%, partly as a result of the drying out of external funding such as that of USAID. But I'm just wondering, how is this government of Somalia is actually adjusting its finances to be able to finance this bold strategy that you have actually mentioned in your remark. Thank you very much.
Okay, really an excellent set of comments and questions. Let's turn first to Ana Maria, and maybe you want to speak a little bit more about the point that Eugenio made about the dangers of perhaps if external funders come in and work with parallel institutions. How can we solve problems in countries while building institutions?
I think it's a very important point, Eugenio, and I agree with that completely. No, if we don't work with the governments, then the external institutions are going to leave, and things may revert back to what it was before. And it's a very difficult balance, no? Because that you need to strike. You need to do short-term work that has immediate impacts, but you need also to build the institutions for the governments to be able to continue working. I would say that we need to do both things. At the IDB, we work quite a lot with governments, and we are involved in a long-term process with governments, doing something very similar to what Patricia was mentioning. No, it's hiring people that work within the institutions that are embedded within the national government institutions and working with the governments as such, and executing the credits and the operations that we do through executing agencies of the governments, in which we need to build capacity, train the institutions, support them with additional people that are very knowledgeable of what they're doing. But sometimes when you have emergencies, maybe it is important also to be able to quickly arrive and support the governments and countries to overcome what they are doing. But I fully agree with what you're saying, Eugenio.
Great. Thank you very much. Patricia, or actually, let's ask maybe Eugenia this question. Katrina is wondering, how do we actually come to grips with addressing the issues you've outlined so well in your report? how do you deal both with fragility and conflict-affected areas in localized spots while also thinking about the country as a whole, given a fast-growing population? How would you advise, now that you've set out the problem, how is the World Bank going to try to address it?
No, that's an excellent question. If we knew how to do this, we wouldn't be here, right? So I think this report outlines where we stand at a global level. I think what we're trying to do now is bring some of these nuances into the specific conversations at the country level. So this the type of nuances related to, okay, what are the sources of fragility? What are the elements that are behind the problem? And where is this? What are the issues behind poverty or the distributional aspects, and how we solve this issue jointly? And that requires going very granularly in terms of what are the specific constraints. So I think we all know from the evidence, okay, there are a lot of constraints in terms of how we build incomes, what are the issues related to market access, information access, etc. But what is actually constraining, right, the process to, move into a virtuous cycle? And I completely agree there is a bit of a tension in terms of, okay, we want to scale up things that work, but then on the other hand, we know it's very country specific. And so I think what we're trying at least to do in our diagnostics at the country level is help bridge that. So in a way, first, bring to the table what we know has worked in similar context, knowing that not necessarily that's going to work in that specific context, and then try to connect that with the local knowledge, the local researchers, and see, okay, how you actually, test or tailor these elements, and the importance of piloting. The other nuance, in terms more on the response, is the fact that we need to be much more proactive, much more anticipatory in the way we respond. And things so far is being a bit more like reactive than proactive. So I think right now, the data, the knowledge that we have there, the capacity that is there, can put us in, we can push a bit more in terms of thinking out how we think about social protection systems that now are more adaptive, and that can have a triple return than what we've been doing before, right? Because if you can actually minimize that human capital loss, before the shock hits, that actually gives you the savings that we really need into the system. And finally, now the challenge is, in a way, something that we've been discussing with, is what are the engines of growth in this context? So there are these specific solutions that can actually lift people out of poverty, but how we really think about the engines of growth that can actually bring the private sector and push these countries into a much faster growth trajectories, facing the fact that there are many people entering the job market, and how you create those jobs. And that's, in a way, the next phase of some of this analytical work that we're doing.
Great, thanks very much. We had a question for IFAD, but IFAD is no longer up here. But I'm going to turn that into a question for Ana Maria and Yo, because the question was, what is IFAD doing differently, right? Because we heard their focus, of course, is the same, but surely something has changed in light of this environment we find ourselves in. And so I know both IDB and IFAD are part of the AgriConnect initiative, which was just launched. So maybe you could say just a few words about that, both of you. And then let's give the closing question or answer rather, to Kamal. The question here put by a former USAID employee: how are you coping? You're rolling out this new plan in a difficult environment. So maybe we start with you, Ana Maria, and then Yo, and then Kamal will close us off.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, we are part of the AgriConnect initiative. The initiative is to help 250 million small producers worldwide and to benefit them through support. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't have as much small producers as other regions. So basically what we're going to do is that we're going to benefit 10 million small producers. This is about 60% of the small producers in Latin America and the Caribbean. What is the idea with this? We are going to design packages with precision agriculture, with infrastructure, public goods, specific public goods for agriculture, and transfer of technology. This is something that we have been doing in Latin America and the Caribbean for a while, but basically what we're going to do is to boost up this. Which are the instruments that we're going to use? Our investment operations, our loans, but also technical assistance, technical cooperation, and blended finance for us to be able to support all these farmers that we seek to support from today till 2030. So that's what we're going to do with the resources that we have at the IDB, with the capital that we have at the IDB, and the financial instruments that we have in place.
Great. Do you want to reflect as well on the AgriConnect initiative?
Yes, just briefly. I mean, I think it's a very interesting initiative. It's also large scale. It's one of the main flagships of the World Bank going forward. I think the target is about $9 billion annually by 2030, which is a lot of money, and with an explicit design or strategy to basically leverage that to bring in more capital from the private sector. So that's very much in line to the point I was making earlier in terms of engaging with the private sector and drawing in private capital. Now, maybe one point on that one, which I didn't make, but our director for Africa, Verio Mane, has made several times the point that actually capital markets in Africa are doing quite well. The problem is they're not investing in the areas that need investment. So there is also, it links up with John's point that the money that is there, the capital that is there, is not always going to the places it needs to go. And that's an issue of institutions, of the right incentives and things like that. And so working on that would also help leveraging that, I think. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think before I go to USAID's effect, as I said, our growth projection has been revised into 3%, around 1% down. But just, what's the problem now? USAID not used to not work through the government, and that's the fact that actually did not being affected, did not being felt when it left through the government budget. So they were doing a parallel process, and mainly through social protection issues. I think on social protection side, I think it has been felt. And the effect is being felt through the overall GDP and the overall economy. But just it's not felt by, like it has been not been taken away the money from the budget. So now what's our budget and how much we are investing through agri-food? The question now, the 10% question. I think our budget is too small. I mean, it goes most of to the wage bill of the security sector, around 400 million, and 600 million comes through IDA, which we have difficulties of absorption capacity difficulties, procurement difficulties, and many things. I think even we have around food systems project through the World Bank around 150 million. What we have absorbed is very tiny because of procurement and other public finance management hurdles. So I think those things also need to be addressed when we're dealing with conflict and fragile affected countries. On how we're dealing with it, I think it was not the ideal time that USAID has been left the space. But it gave us a reality check. It gave us a wake-up call. And that's why actually we came up with Somalia Agri-Food Investment Partnership. And 100 million is not that much money. But I think we're thinking to increase that money for the next 5 to 10 years and come up with other mechanisms of accession, mostly through public-private partnership and building our pipelines through blended financing, grantees, concessional financing, and other ways and means to bridge the gap that actually we have. We are trying our best, but this was a wake-up call for us, and we're trying our best to bridge the gap through that partnership. Now, actually, we have launched. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, we will conclude this really, really interesting discussion. I would like to thank the presenters of the two reports. These are really incredible contributions, I think, to the world of research as well as the world of policy. So many thanks for that. And a huge thank you also to our very distinguished panelists for joining us, for your insightful comments. Many thanks to all of you in the audience, also those of you online. And we hope we can maybe linger with a few of you that are here in person to continue the conversation, and wishing all of you a great afternoon here in Washington, but also a great rest of your day from wherever you may be joining us from virtually. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for our speakers.